Being an entrepreneur can be a lonely place. Most businesses don't even get past the first 3 years. So in this series, we're going to be talking to entrepreneurs that are high-performing or high-performing businesses that can help you with hints, tips and hacks to help you fast-forward your way to success. My name is Mark Burgess. I've got over 20 years experience working as an entrepreneur, building up various different businesses. I've wrote a best-selling book, I speak nationally and internationally at different conferences, and this is Raising Your Game. In this episode of Raising Your Game, I'm going to interview Paul Dunn. Paul's a 4-time TEDx speaker, and he's going to talk about how your company can have a bigger impact in the world, but not only that, you can use it to make your company more profitable. Paul, thanks for coming in today. I know you're a super busy guy flying around the world.
It's a pleasure.
Just before we get into it, are you okay to give the viewers just a bit of a background on yourself and so they know who you are?
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, mate. It is great to be here. And my background is a little bit longer than everyone else's, right, because of age. But let me just use a couple of words that I think might help. So I think that, classically, right, the entrepreneur is supposed to have this sort of hero's journey thing. Everything was rough and tough, and then all of a sudden, you found the answer. I think my life is just a life of luck. I really do. Like, when I was 21, I was one of the first 10 people in Hewlett-Packard in Australia. Oh. And just sort of visiting with Bill Hewlett and Dave Packard and getting that inside you is just really sets you up for an awesome journey. And then, to then really get the entrepreneurial spirit, creating one of Australia's first computer companies, then, interestingly, going to one of my first ever seminars, before you were born, most likely, and it was James Rohn, and that was just one of those amazing moments in your life where it literally changed it, because I thought, wow, I can do what he does. Yeah. And so I sold the computer company and then began speaking around the world, and that was in 1981, wow. Believe it or not. Yes. And then, through various iterations of having a thing called Results Corporation, where we had 23,000 entrepreneurs that we were doing all of the marketing for, through to, and books and all that kind of stuff on the way, through to today, where, as you know, I have the privilege of chairing an amazing organization called B1G1, which is doing a whole host of good around the world as well. And I think that's also central now to entrepreneurship. I think we're now in a place where we've never been before. It's like even if you started a business a year ago, you could not predict the environment that we're in now. Everything is so fast, so different and everything. And I think that one of the central things around that is, I think, I looked up the numbers yesterday, in fact, and it's 79 per hour. You might say, well, what is that? Every hour of every day here in the United Kingdom, 79 new businesses are being started. It's wow. Amazing. And that was in 2017. And that's rocketing up. The prediction is it'll be 720,000 by the end of 2018, right? Which is amazing. So you have to ask yourself, well, why is that happening? And I think it's because there are people in corporate, maybe some watching us now, who are in, well-paid jobs and all that kind of stuff. But increasingly what we're seeing is those people go home at the end of the day, and just before they put their head on the pillow and, their eyes close, they ask themselves an interesting question, which is that all there is? Mm. Yeah. And so I think that leads to this whole thing, as you know from the people that you connect with, that there's this search for meaning and for purpose and everything else. And we're seeing that now as a central thing, that entrepreneurs can shape their business with that kind of focus in it as well. So yeah, it's an interesting time.
So if you started really sort of helping other entrepreneurs back in the early 80s, yes, I'm guessing there must have been a period of time where you started to see that shift happen, whereby it wasn't just about, start a business to make money, yeah, but I'm going to start a business to have obviously I need to make money, I need to live, but I want to have a bit more of an impact in the world. Yeah. Where did that flip start happening, do you think?
Oh, well, there's two answers to that. I think, 2008 was, I think, a critical time. That's what was it called? The global financial crisis. Yeah. And then I think at that point people realized, well, this whole chase for profit, for money and everything else, that it's not fulfilling anymore. So I think there was that point. And then for me, it's an interesting thing. For me, this is an interesting kind of paradox. I used to think, and it's embarrassing for me to tell you this, right? So I used to think that business was all about wow, like wow. Every time you had a meeting, wow, right? In fact, a branding consultant was in a program of mine some years ago, and he said, "Boy, that was amazing." He said, "You need a brand. Henceforth, you will be known as the Wizard of Wow." I'm not making that up. I'm not making that up. And I remember when he said it, I thought, not sure about that, but I'll go with it anyway. And I actually registered that, right? And then I had this moment where I was scheduled to go on, speaking the day before. I was in my room, this hotel somewhere, and I know exactly where it was. And I thought, I can't do that anymore. I really can't do that anymore. And then fortunately, I had someone who I value, who was mentoring me, or who was a mentor, and a guy called Michael Sheargold, who's very big in property, actually, in Australia. And he helped me through that. And I discovered this kind of interesting thing. And I discovered that wow, right, is like, it's like it's almost like a narcotic. You've got to chase it. And when you look at companies, for example, and you can grow, by the way, when you're thinking that in business, but when you look at companies where they're still driven from this sort of self-serving wow perspective, the company will grow, but it sort of relies on one person basically having that. So I got this whole thing that wow is cosmetic, right? Or if you like, now I see it as a narcotic, that you've got to chase it. And so where I went from was that thing to another word, and the word is, oh, it's like that pause, you go, oh. And it's that deep realization, right, that there's something else going on here. And what I equate all with is this ability to connect. And when you think about building a business or building a team, I mean, fundamentally, what is that about? It's all about connection. And it's all about what I call moments of connection. And once we understand that, and by the way, that also means it's not about us anymore. Because you see a lot of entrepreneurs who, sadly, but understandably, fall in love with their product. The product's great, the features, all of that kind of stuff. As opposed to falling in love with the people who use the products and the outcomes that they get. And so that's also a fundamental shift that's going on.
So it's like rather than a wow, which is cosmetic, it's a learning, it's a teaching.
Yes.
Someone teaches you something, then you feel more connected with that person.
Right. Exactly right, and exactly correct. And it's this whole thing about getting it off you, right, and getting it on to the other person. It's all about creating something which allows you to add enormous value to the person that you're serving, or to the companies that you're serving. Once you get that, it's a fundamental change, fundamental.
Do you think that of all the entrepreneurs that you've helped and all of the ones that are potentially watching the show, that there's a lot of people come and ask you the same question, maybe in different words? Do you think to yourself like, yeah, I've solved that like 10 million times for people?
Well, you would think that, wouldn't you? You would think that. But what I find is really interesting, because I mentor a lot of people, and people say, well, why do you do that, right? And yes, there are, the obvious questions like, how do I do this? What happens on my website? All of that sort of stuff, right? But the reason that I do that is because frequently they ask me questions, interesting enough, that I've never heard before. And so when you give the answer, it's kind of interesting. So my head is going, that's the answer to that. And the other part of my head is going, my God, where did that come from, right? So it allows me to have this sort of curiosity that goes on. But I think you're right that there are some central questions which have to do with how do we grow, how do we create, amazing service, how do we attract a team, all of those sorts of things. How do I deal with the ups and downs of entrepreneurship, which are interesting as well, right? But in there, very frequently, there's this way of expressing it that I've never heard before. You go, oh. So that keeps me alive and going as well.
And how how do you deal with the ups and downs of entrepreneurship?
Very challenging, very challenging. The secret to it is, I think, to accept that there's really no such thing as failure. I was once asked to describe failure, and I couldn't. I didn't have it in my. It just didn't resonate with me. And to understand that in everything, however bad it is, and it seems bad at the point, somewhere in there, and it's difficult to find it sometimes, but somewhere in there is a gift. And if you look at it and say, well, hang on a second, what is that telling me? Because it's telling you something, and you can sort of decode it. Then it becomes a gift that you look back on and say, wow, thank goodness that happened.
Yeah. Yeah, even if I had it the other day, whereby someone in our we were trying to sell this product to this company and they didn't take it in the end, and the part of you initially, the emotional bit, thinks like, oh, they must be crazy.
Yeah, it's their fault.
You can just look internally and go like, we just must not be doing a very good job here.
There you go.
Because we must not be explaining this properly. Yeah. So, like you say, if we take that as a lesson, perhaps we can improve this in the future and see that as something that changed the path of the company.
Exactly right. And today, of course, there's so many opportunities to make those changes because there's so much in technology, there's so much automation that we can do and all those sorts of things. So again, as we started when we started out, there's really never been a time like this to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Okay, we need to go to a break in a minute, but just before we do, you mentioned before about the whole B1G1, and I want to dig into that a little bit more after the break. But from an entrepreneur's point of view, if you're somewhere in the middle of your journey, whereby cash flow is biting you, you might like the idea of doing something for the greater good. But there's always that survival instinct going on inside of you as well, whereby you're thinking to yourself, when I'm a billionaire, I'm going to change the world.
Yeah, the someday I'll.
Is there just before we sort of go to the break, is there a something that you would say to those people whereby actually you don't have to wait until you're a billionaire?
Well, that's right, and maybe we'll pick up on this after the break. But yeah, this whole thing of when people say that, I sometimes say to them, if it's a tough love, I might say, well, what is it that you don't understand about this? What is it you don't understand? That when you put that as a central part, it changes everything. Right? It changes everything because it's not focusing on you, it's focusing off you. And that's a fundamental change.
Cool. Okay, so we'll pick up on that after the break. Thanks for watching the first half. Don't go away. Okay, so before the break, we just started to touch on this whole concept of the whole B1G1. For some people out there, they won't know what that is.
Right.
I'll allow you to explain the principle of it yourself, but in that explanation, something that came up in my head when I first heard about it was, as we spoke about before the break, a lot of businesses don't feel like they're perhaps in a position, profit or cash flow wise, where they can just start giving money away. So perhaps in your sort of explanation of how this works, you could also cover off the fact that how that works.
How it works, yeah. Well, and let me sort of do it almost in reverse. Right? So what happens is when people are involved in B1G1, which we will explain in a minute, which is this, well, let me do it now. Which is the extraordinary idea, or this extraordinary thing of imagining, well, actually not imagining, but this is how it started in 2007, where Masami Sato, who co-founded it with me, said, let's imagine a different world. Let's imagine a world where every time business is done, something great happens. And then, like, for example, imagine someone, here we are in TV world, if you like. So imagine someone going to buy a plasma TV, just for the sake of discussion, right? On account of how they want better vision. Wouldn't it be great if when people did that, a kid who could not see got the gift of sight? Wouldn't it be great if when you and I had a cup of coffee, a child got access to water? Wouldn't it be great if when someone bought a book, a tree got planted? Wouldn't it be great? Someone said to me the other day in terms of property, they said, you know what? When you think about property has no soul, right? So wouldn't it be great if you could do something like that inside the property thing? And the answer is it would be great. And that's exactly what's happened. And most interestingly, we used to talk about B1G1 this way, or buy one, give one was how it was originally conceived. And we used to say, you know, in B1G1, you can give from 1 cent. That's extraordinary. 1 cent, right, makes a difference, right? Gives a kid education in rural India. We used to say, because it's true, that 100% of your giving goes where you want it to go. We track it, we have maps, we do all of this kind of thing. The board rejects 9 out of every 10 of the projects and so on. We used to say all of that, right? Because we thought it was all about giving, right, in that sense. But now, in fact, just recently, maybe about 5 months ago, we said, okay, to our members, and then there are now, 2,600 of those around the world or something. So we said to our members, what do you say? If you were here saying to Mark, right, what does B1G1 do? The way they would answer that now is they would say, it transforms my enterprise. And then when you ask them, oh, why is that? They say, because it shifts the spirit of the enterprise. And so if you think about when you're starting something and you think, oh, I can't afford this, I can't afford that, or whatever, but you think about it a different way, right? You think about it, what would happen if, as of today, for 1 cent, that's because all it is, right? I could do something that will shift the spirit of this enterprise and will be a magnet for talent, because we know that millennials are like this whole purpose-driven thing, which you become, and where the clients, the customers of yours, because they're getting a little gratitude certificate that says, by the way, just because you dealt with me in some way today, in some cases it's just because I sent you an email, right? This happened, then the customers are going, wow, that's amazing, that's amazing. And so guess what they're doing? They're talking to other people saying, by the way, I just dealt with this thing and this happened, you know, maybe you and I should do that. So it's when you get it, that it's a central, being on purpose is a central part of making your business grow. Someone said to me the other day, they said it this way, they said, when you lose your way, it's because you've lost your why. Or to put it another way, when you find your why, you find your way. Does that make sense?
It does make perfect sense.
And you and I were talking about, before we came on the set here, you and I were talking about my friend Simon Sinek, right? And who published, obviously, Start With Why. And one of the great things that he says is this. He says a lot of great things, right? As you know. But he says differentiation, and this is interesting, right? Because all of us have competitors. That's just the nature of the beast, right? So we are trying to differentiate and so on. So he puts it this way. He says, differentiation comes from clarity of why. And that is so, so true. The people that I mentor, that I'm privileged to mentor, that's where we start. And so getting on purpose right up front and then being able to articulate it, even though you might go, oh, I can't afford. Oh, by the way, the other thing is, we used to associate, did we not, giving with, oh, it's the millionaires that do this. It's the, right? But what if that wasn't true? What if it's the coffee shop that every time you have a cup of coffee is giving a kid access to water and that just costs 1 cent? I mean, what if? And that's what it is.
Okay, so what about the people that sort of feel a little bit funny about almost announcing their giving? You know, they've been taught that they should maybe give but keep it to themselves. What would you say to those people?
Well, first of all, I understand it, because some people have very deeply held religious beliefs about that, and I would not suggest at all that people go, you know, look at me or anything like that, because in B1G1, you usually, quote unquote, announce it after the fact rather than before, which is kind of cool. But one of the things I think that I've learned just recently is this whole concept of legacy. And because in a sense, when we're giving, we're leaving a legacy, right? And it's very important for us to realize that. So I was talking to this person who I was mentoring, actually, her name is Ali Fowler, and Ali said, you know, Paul, when we frequently talk about legacy, we talk about leaving a legacy, but let me give you another L word. And she said, what about thinking about it this way, living a legacy? Well, whoa, that's so cool. And then you know how it is when someone gives you an idea, you just flip back with another one. And I said, okay, so we now got leaving a legacy, living a legacy. Why don't we talk about leveraging a legacy? And what that means is that we don't but we kind of let people know that this is happening, that this is transforming, and I'm not transforming the business. And I know a lot of people now who've had that deeply held belief, but then they go, actually, you know what? If I can leverage it, then that means more giving gets done in our world, and we can seriously help B1G1 achieve what B1G1 is all about, which is creating a world that's full of giving. And why would we want to do that? Because it's a happier world. Simple as that.
Okay, that's awesome. Okay, so coming back down to maybe some bits and pieces that might help entrepreneurs out there. I remember once coming to listen to you speak, and you were talking about the way the brain sees numbers.
Yes.
Can you just give people a bit of an idea around how that works?
Surely can. Yeah, it's really weird. Whenever the brain sees a number, like for example a price, it always seeks to compare it with something, right, with another number. And so what's interesting is on all the tests, for example, that have been done on this, if someone is looking at, let's say, a 100 kilometer an hour, 100 mile an hour speed sign, and then you give them various numbers, they will actually compare those prices with that 100 sign, which has got nothing to do with the dollars, right? So that's one of the reasons why when you realize that you can introduce premium services at higher prices. And of course what you would do is you would start with that higher price, because that's what the brain anchors to. It just anchors to that. So you might say, this is not for everybody, but it's X, and all of a sudden the brain's got that number. But you know there's another way of doing this, which is this, and all of a sudden this sounds much less than that. As opposed to starting from, well, of course, you know, there's the cheapest way we can do it is here, and then there's all of a sudden that sounds like a big gap. But when you reverse it around the other way, and that's called behavioral economics. And in the last 12 years, 5 Nobel Economics Prizes have been won by people who talk about behavioral economics. Wow. And so behavioral economics is a really cool thing for us as entrepreneurs to understand. And it's all about little tiny words that can change outcomes as well.
So if you're giving someone a price, maybe you should try and think of a much bigger number that you can put before that price in general terms. If you're saying, let's talk about property for instance, if you're saying, oh, it's going to cost you £10,000 to sell your house, perhaps before that you should be saying, for your £2 million house.
Then all of a sudden they've got the 2 million. Yeah, exactly.
It's going to be costing you
That's
10,000.
what happens. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. Yeah.
That's cool. Okay, so we're coming towards the end of the show. If there's people out there that have heard about the whole buy one, give one, or want to connect with you, or just want to somehow find out more information, get involved in that, like, what's the best ways that people should do that?
Oh, very simple. Thank you. They should just go to B1G1. That's B followed by a 1, followed by a G, followed by a 1, b1g1.com. And everything will be there. And we very much welcome you coming along and having a look and seeing how this can influence your life as well. Yeah,
great. Okay, it's been an absolute pleasure. It's been, since the first time that I heard you speak, it's been something that I've always wanted to do, is to sit and have a conversation with you. I hope everybody else enjoyed it. It was fantastic.
I've enjoyed it immensely.
Thank you.
Thank you.